Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Humans on the Verge. This week, I have someone who I have met in person before. I always love that. I always love when I bring humans that I actually know who are on the verge. So it's just really exciting to have my guest here today. My guest is Craig Chalquist, PhD, of course. He's a former psychotherapist. He's a professor, a scholar, definitely, a lecturer. He teaches and writes at the intersection of consciousness, place, story, and imagination, all things we've been talking about the last few months here at Humans on the Verge. He's very busy. He's published and written lots of books, multiple nonfiction books. Mostly the focus is on Terrapsychology, which is something we'll get into. We'll explain what that is in a minute. Ecotherapy, we'll talk a little bit about that too. And also exploring one's personal myth, which for me is the mother lode of life, certainly. But he's also a fiction writer. And I must admit, I have not read his fiction yet, but he's got a speculative fiction series called Lamplighter. And we'll be talking a little bit about that phrase today. So this might be some good summer reading for all of us. Currently, Craig is the academic program director of consciousness, psychology, and transformation at National University. He's taught both at the California Institute of Integral Studies and Pacifica Graduate Institute. All of these institutes here are ones that are on the leading edge of human consciousness and psyche and ways of looking at the world. But recently, Craig has founded something called Lampcove, which we will definitely be talking about today, which is part of the Pronaia,
Pronaia.
Pronaia, like not paranoia. It's
Right.
pronoia.
Yeah.
And I know an astrologer who uses that phrase and was created to address the dire need of a new kind of change agent. That's why he started this Lampcove. Craig and I met first, I think pre-pandemic. It must be a pre-pandemic conference at Pacifica where he spoke about the field of inquiry and action that he has named enchantivism, which the minute I heard that word, I'm like, I have to be friends with this person. That is the coolest word ever. And enchantivism really denotes the actions of creative people at every level of society who give us glimpses of how things could be and who are trying to make collective change through inspiration. If that doesn't sing to all of your souls out there, then you're listening to the wrong podcast. Craig's into always expanding his threads of inquiry. I'm always seeing new emails about new things. He's always looking for new corners of psyche and experience to understand the current human condition. And one of the things lately that he's been really seeing into, which is part of this Lamplighters and Lampcove, is the need for a new kind of change agent in the world. People who are cultural edge walkers, who have untapped potential for change. These are people who aren't dependent on the heroic patriarchal model of change, which we will get into and talk a little bit about what that means, and can even help us turn away from the capitalistic kind of hyper-individualistic materialism that we have lived in for decades, but social media has really, really heightened that sense of self also. And of course, as we all know, that hyper individualistic materialism has really unmoored us from our inner and social and natural worlds. And so Craig would love to connect us and the collective to a new overarching big story or mythology of meaning that certainly we're lost. I mean, there's a lot of people talking about the meta crisis, the meaning crisis. I talk all the time here about John Vervaeke and Ian McGilchrist, who are kind of talking about those things through a cognitive science perspective, but very philosophical stuff. So Craig fits right into that conversation here. And so Craig and I are going to dig into the material that he's been geeking out on and that are kind of foundational to him. We'll geek out together, and maybe we'll get some clues here for all of us humans on the verge. Welcome, Craig. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's great to be here with you.
I thought before we jump into the world of enchantivism and certainly its potential to change the world, I also would love to spend a little time here introducing the audience to the broader ideas of terrapsychology and ecotherapy, because I think they're foundational and obviously part of the foundation of your thinking as you've progressed along in your thinking and your work in the world. And I think it would help all of us ground in really what we mean by the lens of enchantment. And of course, it's something that I'm particularly connecting to in my life right now is a sense of place and the power of place. So let's start there a little bit. Let's start with a little bit about maybe like the features of your current path and how you kind of found your way in general into this weird world of depth psychology, eco-psychology that you and I tend to live in.
Yeah. Maybe I should talk about the depth psychology part first because it happened before the other, maybe.
Yeah, great. Yeah, start there.
So I was in college as a psych major and in a really uninspiring psychology program. It was all behaviorism back then and just not really suiting me. It didn't light me up. At one point, I thought, I think I'm just going to change my major. I don't like any of this stuff. And then I had a really great English professor, Sigmar Schwartz, who, I talked to him a few times after class, and he said, "Oh, you need to be reading Carl Jung, and you need to be reading like Maslow and Karen Horney and all these other people and world mythology and all this other stuff." So he was my first real mentor and just set me loose on, Hermann Hesse and all the deep stuff, right? And I was just devouring it. And so once that happened, I decided I wanted to be a psychotherapist. And I'm grateful to that training. It was mostly family system psychotherapy. And it did prepare me for 9 years of using it on and off. But there was nothing about Jung. There was nothing about symbols or archetypes or myths. And I sort of had to get that on my own.
So interesting. So you went off searching on your own for that broader conversation that certainly Jung brings us into, that connects us to psychology. Yeah, it's pretty rare out there. I mean, I was at UCLA also, being one of the students who would go into the cog behavior grad students, experiments. Yeah. And I'd always figure it out at the beginning. And then they would have to like interview me afterwards, like, okay, how did you figure it out? I was like, well, but yeah. I too was so turned off on that path. And really it wasn't until I discovered Pacifica that I actually, suddenly it was like, oh, those are pieces of things that I know about already through kind of the new age stuff that I had studied in my 20s. But what a lovely thing. You had this English professor who was your threshold guardian to depth psychology. It's so interesting. And of course it makes sense, right? Through literature, through story. He led you there. So there you were, you had your psychotherapy business or thing going or whatever, and yet you were feeding yourself on the depth psychology. And so how did you end up over here in our little land?
So, a couple of ways. One was I wanted to go to a school for PhD studies that had some of the depth psychology work in it. And I looked at different programs and settled on Pacifica. And I met with, I was at Pacifica actually for a year in the clinical program, and it was okay. It was good training, but I thought, I need something else, So I ended up talking to Mary Watkins, who was teaching
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Yeah. And I said, well, you have this program there called depth psychology. What's that? And she said, oh, it's kind of like a cultural therapeutics. And I went, say more about that. What the hell is that? And so, the idea of healing the culture, healing instead of just the individual or just couples or things that I was used to, right? I had done
Yeah.
some family therapy and that was fun. Families are great to work with, especially when there's teenagers. But, nobody was talking about, except for people like Jung and Eric Fromm and others, nobody was talking about the culture being sick and
Yeah.
in need of healing. And so when she said that, I lit up and I went, just what do I need to sign? I'm in, And
Here's my money. Take it, please. Yeah. It's so interesting. When I was at Pacifica, I was in the counseling program, and
Mm,
it's that cultural stuff really, really pulled me.
mm,
But I
mm.
knew that I needed to heal my family stuff first. And so
Yep.
I needed to go that route. And even though I got my master's in counseling psychology, I was an intern therapist for 2 years, and that was it. And then I
Mm,
knew I wanted to go into coaching because I wanted to have a
mm,
broader conversation. And
mm.
here I am now, 20 years later after graduating, and now I'm really ready to be a cultural
Yeah.
psychologist. Like, I
Mm,
really get it now. And I think maybe also because the times are so fraught that I don't.
yeah.
I know we've been all trying for a long time, but it feels like there's soon going to be hopefully some sort of a tipping point. So
Mm,
yeah, so this cultural psychology, this broader conversation with that the culture is sick, which James Hillman
mm,
uh, did that great book with that journalist, and I can't remember his name right now. We've had 100 years of psychotherapy,
mhm.
and we're still fucked up, or whatever the title is. And it's a great conversation
Yeah.
between these two guys of like, yeah, it seems like none of this is working because, as Hillman always said, something about that hyper individualism.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
Mhm,
important work, you guys, to do your inner work. I mean, it really is important for you to know your shadow shit, to know your
mhm.
unconscious habits, especially if you want to be in a good, intimate relationship with someone. But as I know, and you'll peel the onion on that until the day you die, for sure. Inner
Yep.
work is always going to be happening. But there's something that happens when you widen your gaze and allow in the world to participate in the conversation, which can still be partly a conversation about your inner world, your dynamics and things like
Mm,
that. But then it becomes also the uh, the ego, the I,
mm,
uh, the kind of the edges of that go away a little bit.
mm.
You're
Yeah.
you're a different version of your I when you do open the lens of the world. And anybody listening to this, even if this isn't your path, the minute you go into nature and you let your body settle
Mm,
down after 5 to 10 minutes,
mm,
you probably know what I'm talking about.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So cultural psychology cracked you open, and you got to
Mm,
study in the depth psychology program, which I kind of
mm,
wish I had done also. Uh,
mm,
and uh, and what's so interesting, Craig, is that you are clearly someone who is personally exploring it, but you've really
mm,
added so much to the conversation around how anybody can start to encounter and be in a
mm,
practice of being connected more to the culture, the collective culture, but
mm,
nature especially.
mm,
Could you talk
mm.
a little bit about, for you, what your fascination is, what the pull is for you in your soul and in this direction?
Mm. There's this phrase that a lot of us use now, the great conversation. And what we mean is everybody out there is speaking, not just humans. And so when we take a little bit of that time that you were talking about, you start hearing the birds and the insects and everybody else out there, and they're talking to each other. We know that from all kinds of science and naturalists and everybody else, right? And sometimes we're part of that, sometimes we're not. But it's psychologically important that we're only part of it. We're not in the center of it, right? So in a way, it can be a little bit of a curative of the human narcissism that Janine Canty talks about so much in her book. She's an eco-psychologist. And, that fascinates me, being in that larger conversation. Also, you mentioned ecotherapy earlier. Around the time I met, actually, it must have been a little bit before I met Linda Bazell. She was the one who helped me compile that. We did it together. It was her idea, the Ecotherapy edited volume. And so I was in my own therapy at one point because, it's a good idea to do that when you're in psychotherapy training.
Yes,
And,
essential.
If only Freud and Jung had done it. But
Well, Jung did, but he did it by himself.
Yeah.
With the red book.
Yeah. He spent a lot of time arguing with his inner figures. But, I was, at one point I was getting depressed. And so the psychotherapist, I had a lot of losses going on at the same time, a divorce and things like that. So the therapist said, well, I'm going to refer you for medication. And so I was on antidepressants for about a year, and they did work. I'm not by any means anti-psychotropic medication. It does work if it's prescribed correctly, which in my case it was. But then I started gardening just as a hobby. My dad had been a really good gardener and just a natural. And there was a woman I was doing a trade with in Santa Barbara. So she was, she knew more about gardening than I ever will. And she was teaching me. And I was doing the heavy stuff for her that she couldn't do anymore. She was old. So pretty soon I felt like I didn't need to be on the meds anymore. I didn't feel flat anymore. And so I went off them. And then years later, I caught up with the research that says that all that good soil bacteria actually gets your brain stimulated. And I had learned that through gardening without gloves. She always said, take your gloves off and get your hands in the soil and actually touch the plants, right? So then Linda Bazell shows up at City College, Santa Barbara City College. I met her there, and she said, we should write something about ecotherapy. And I went, what's that? And so it's an umbrella term for all these healing modalities that involve us interacting with the natural world psychologically. So,
So like the grounding exercises or the forest bathing, like these are some of the hip kind of Instagram terms you people might hear out there about some of this. This is actually really grounded in this thing that we, just by being in a natural setting or interacting with it. I have to say, Bob and I ripped up our lawn a few years ago because the city of LA pays you to do that, folks. I highly recommend it. They paid us a stupid amount of money to rip up our lawn. And we put in a whole native garden. And so we're in year 3 now, and it's pretty established. And a good chunk of our day is commenting about who's visiting. And we sit out there in the afternoon and we soak it up, and we've got crows and we've got squirrels and we've got doves and we've got monarchs now. And we feel like we're part of something now. And I go out there and I'll do some deadheading on some of the native flowers and stuff to keep the stuff robust. And so that's my level of gardening, but it's something I have just started. And I have to say, there is just a level of belonging, but also just I think my mood has notched up a few notches just as kind of its basic. It's like kind of set point now is up a little bit because we have this, and it's nothing big. It's no big deal or anything. It's just this little native front yard, but it just brings us endless joy. So. It's been surprising to me because I've been thinking about it the last few weeks. Like, why is my mood so good? And it's like, oh, it's because I have this like land of enchantment in the front yard that we talk about all day. So what are some other things about terrapsychology, which is obviously psychology of the earth, right? That it's some sort of a place where we meet our human consciousness, sentient psyche meets the psychology of the earth and the land. What are some other features of that people play with, that you play with, that are practices, and what is kind of the underlying kind of concept behind this work?
Two things that come to mind about that. One is in Ireland, you see plenty of fields being cultivated and harvested from, and there's often bushes or trees in the center of them. And when you ask the farmers why that is, they say that's where the fairies live. So ecotherapy and ecopsychology don't really deal with that. They're big on science, but poor in story. And there's mountains of science at this point that even minimal nature contact is good for us. Just huge amounts of it, but not too much on that level, right? So there's that. And then there's also the fact that so ecopsychology itself deals with our psychological relations with the earth, with nature, with the elements, things like that. But I remember talking years ago with one of the founders of the field, and I said, but what about the buildings? What about the roadways and the cities that we live in and stuff like that? Most of us live in cities at this point, and she said, well, that's often seen kind of negatively in the field because cities tear us down in some ways, which there's science behind that, right? But what can we do about that? And I actually asked James Hillman that question around the time that I met him. And because he was going on about, it's a psychic split, nature good, cities bad, and he hates that, He was born in Atlantic City. And I said, well, what would you do about that? And he said, why don't we welcome some nature into the city? And I thought that's, and that's being done, of course,
Yeah.
So terrapsychology goes a bit beyond all of that and asks, so how do the things of the world, everything pretty much, roads, neighborhoods, nature, whatever, how does that live in us as moods, as dream figures, as conflicts that we're in? Is it meaningful that sometimes I write better when I'm near a creek? My energies flow. And is it meaningful that I sometimes go up on hills like a lot of us do for a higher insight about some trouble I'm dealing with? We're all instinctive terrapsychologists, right?
Yes,
we all do this.
Surely. We would have to be in order to be here, to have survived as these humanoids things that, ultimately all living things are terrapsychologists.
Exactly.
Because they know where they belong. They know who their neighbors are. They know who to communicate to for resources, for cooperation. They know who they're in competition with. You just watch my wisteria plant, attaching itself to everything around it. Hi, you're my friend now. I'm going to use you to go over there. So that's so interesting. I love that. I never really understood the difference between the eco psychology and the terrapsychology. That really the eco is the one way of looking at it, which is like, how does the world, how do we interact with the world and that? But this other thing about how does the world affect us? How are we participating in it? And you mentioned that earlier about how when we open ourselves up to a natural place, that our centeredness, our hyper individualism is taken away because we become a part of a we instantly. And I really do think, certainly for me, I started deep diving with Stephen Eisenstadt in dream work about 7 years ago. And that's really helped me open up past my own personal narcissism of like, it's all got to be about me and my ideas or my story or whatever it is, which is what the part of the healing I had to go through. But it's been really exciting to watch how I'm different even when I go to new lands or new places. I was just at Ghost Ranch for 4 days, and I decided before going there, and we drove for 2 days there. So we really let the city disappear. And we were, driving from LA to New Mexico. It's pretty much all desert except a little part of northern Arizona where you're up in the mountains a little bit. And so I felt like something was falling off of us, falling off of me as we were driving, the urban energy, and then those horizons show up. And that wide thinking that gets to happen. And then we get to northern New Mexico and to Ghost Ranch in particular, and you're surrounded by rock formations that are talking to you all day long.
Yep.
That's the only way I can describe it. And so I conversed a lot with the mountains and the rocks there. It was a nice conversation. It's really interesting what happens when you start to widen out in that way, and let it in.
Yes, I like that way of putting it. That's great. Let it in. Yeah, it's like that. It's everybody's trying to tell you something. Listen.
Yeah. What are there some places for you, or was there a place that kind of woke you up to this as you unfolded more and learned intellectually more about it? I think the intellect sometimes goes there first, and not always. Sometimes we have a big moment and then we go, what the fuck was that?
Yeah.
And then as intellectual people are like, okay, I got to figure out what that is. But are there some places, or is there a place in particular that you're willing to share that really do that for you, or was your kind of your initiation into this kind of seeing and being?
When I was a starving graduate student some years ago, my friend Daniel Graham made a room available so I could live with him. We met in college and we've been friends ever since. And so I was living at his place in Escondido, California, which is near my hometown, San Diego. And I had a dream where I had had a relationship that ended not too long before the dream, a couple of weeks. And the figure in the dream seemed like my ex-girlfriend. And I was happy to see her because when we separated, we thought, well, let's take some time off even from being in contact and just see how it goes, So I was missing her. And I called her by name in the dream. And she frowned at me. And as she frowned, part of her face, dreams are so awesome in their creativity. It started going straight down like this, her mouth. And I was like, that's kind of weird. And this isn't her. And, and she felt familiar. Like there was this presence about her that I recognized, but not consciously. And I was like, who is this? And I asked her, who are you? And she looked at me like I was an idiot. And she said, San Diego. And I woke up and I went, what the hell was that? And so I was, I'd done dream work for some years on my own, other people's, and, I worked with that. But like you were saying earlier, making it all about us, it just didn't work. What's my anima doing, as Jungians would say, and all that. It just felt, it felt completely, it was like, no, Hillman eventually asked me, what kind of anima is California? That was a cool question.
Oh, that is a cool question.
But, yeah. But, so I didn't know what to do with any of it. And so I was talking to Mary Watkins about it. And she said, well, if you had grown up in an indigenous culture, it would just make sense that places speak to you like that. And I was thinking too about Jung's observation that the psyche personifies. It can take any experience you have and turn it into a character in dream and fantasy. So I just decided to play with it. What if that really was the spirit of place? What if San Diego, however I perceive her, was really trying to tell me things? So I started studying my hometown, the history of it, looking for more dreams, which I had. I started a whole conversation. And this figure would tell me, we'll go out to like Point Loma. There's a statue there you need to see and stuff like that. And so out of that grew my version of terrapsychology. And it really changed my worldview. I mean, that was a what the fuck moment, that dream. I woke up and went, oh my God, Daniel, let me talk to you a minute,
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Yeah. It's so interesting too, because it's so I feel so lucky to have this wider perspective so that when an encounter like that happens, most people go, oh, it's just a dream or whatever, which is, yes, of course. So yes, you can, yes. And then I'm always the yes. And what if not? What if we enter into it with curiosity and an open heart? And because then when you do that, literally a whole world opens up for you.
Yeah.
And, Stephen Eisenstadt talks a lot about longing and how he always looks for longing in a dream. And what is is there something pulling you? Is there a longing in it? Because longing shows up a lot in dreams. And we talk about how longing is really just the urge to belong, to belong. And that's really what I feel like we're talking about here, is that it is a real sense of belonging that as humans, this is what the meta crisis is all about. Ultimately, it's that we don't feel like we belong inside of the big story of life anymore. And, before the Age of Enlightenment, we were shepherded along and we had this huge, world story of, depending on what part of the world you were in, but certainly the three major religions really fostered a sense of your place in the universe and your place in it and your relationship to it. You had so much relation to it. Even when Christianity, like you said, you were talking about the fairies in the middle of the field in Ireland, that whole sense of place is still so alive in Ireland. It's still part of it, of belonging. And certainly indigenous people are completely belong to where they are. They're in story with everything. They're in relationship with everything. And this modern world, nowadays we're cut down into, are you a red state or a blue state in America?
Yeah.
That's your whole level of belonging you get to have these days if you want to be in some sort of discourse about what's going on in the world. And it's two piles. It's two choices and it's two big piles and it's like so ridiculous. And no one really feels like, maybe the edges feel like they're actually blue and they're actually red. And then there's like 80% of us in the middle who are going, what the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this sense of belonging is, I feel like it's part of my job now, like as a coach, and I do this transformational work, and my program is also called Humans on the Verge. And initially it was about helping people move through some major transitions in their life, and so that they could feel more authentic going into the next chapter, kind of a thing. And I learned all that stuff through coaching and certainly depth psychology and shadow work and all of that. But ultimately, I really do feel like, as I'm entering my elder years, I turned 62 last week.
Oh, wow. Happy birthday. Wow.
Thank you. That I feel like it is about really helping people to get a broader relationship with belonging in the world.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense to me on so many levels. It's really up for me right now too. Everything you just said. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was, reading a little bit about this new project you're doing and this new impulse you have. I think you've done all the scholarly stuff will always be there, and that's who you are, and you're always forwarding that thinking. But this, enchantivism in general, and then this wanting to help foster people to be change agents, different kind of change agents in the world, and empowering them to do that. Wondering how belonging fits in or with that work you're doing there.
When I lived in Calabasas, which is near Los Angeles for folks who don't know, I was married at the time. This was many years ago. And my younger stepson wanted to go to a Star Trek convention in LA, and I hate crowds. I'm an introvert. And so I was like, I tried to get his mother to take him, and she's like, "You're not putting this on me. You guys watch Star Trek. You go." So that was fair. So we went there, and I was astonished by the fact that it was a really big convention. There were people from all over the world. There are thousands of people, and people of every human type you could think of, and they all spoke a common language. They all spoke a common mythology. They knew Star Trek really well. I mean, I thought, what I'm seeing here is actually a form of community that we don't often see outside of places like this.
Yep.
And I heard later that there were these two people who fell in love at a convention, and they didn't speak the same language. They were from different countries, but they spoke Klingon.
Oh my God.
So they could talk to each other, right?
Oh God, I love that.
A love affair starting in Klingon. Whatever works, right? So, and common symbols, right? The symbol for, I don't have it in front of me. There's a symbol in Star Trek called the IDIC, IDIC. It means infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And that's a huge idea among Star Trek fans, a big symbol. So it got me wondering, what are the possibilities for creating community based in imagination, fiction? Cosplay is a big thing now. Why do we have to take our stories so seriously and literally? I grew up, you and I grew up around the same time in Southern California. I was in San Diego, you were in LA. My family was pretty different. They were strict, Lutheran, Republican, conservative family. And, growing up there, we were always told about absolute this and absolute that. And by the time I got to college, all of it was in flux. And I just went, I'm going to do like I did when I was a kid. I'm going to be following for the truths that show up in inspiring stories and not really worry about whether they're factually true or not. So, and then I ended up not, because when you have an absolute belief, you fight with other people over their absolute belief. It's inevitable, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. That thing about multiplicity, right? Which is such a big part of what James Hillman pulled out of Carl Jung in some ways. Like, that there's all the gods, that's why I think, there's a little bit of fascination, especially for Hillman, with the classics of Greek and Roman mythology, which it was his personal passion. But, so everyone's represented in those. And all the gods are also human-like. They're not transcendent beings. They're fuck-ups. They're jealous. They're tenacious. They're all the human, so there was this ability to relate to it. But this multi-perspectival position is so essential. And, that's the thing about imagination, is that's the doorway to that, is the minute you let yourself not take yourself so seriously and not hang desperately onto some truth that's, ride or die kind of a truth, it doesn't mean there's not truth or good or beautiful in the world, those kind of classic values. But when you let yourself get beyond what the ego believes is true, maybe it's more about that, and let curiosity lead you, like you were saying, like, I'm just going to look for things that inspire me, and you have to be super curious to say that to yourself and to allow it to happen. And so when you started thinking about helping people, enchantivism is part of that, is like looking for the thing that kind of lights us up or moves us towards something. What is your definition of enchantivism, and how do you use it, and how are you wanting to bring it forward into the world more?
So for me, enchantivism has to do with showing people how things could be. instead of only how bad things are. And I always, when I introduce this, I always try to be really clear. It's not positive thinking, which I think in some cases is a form of denial, right?
Yep.
Which in America, we do that very well. Denial and hypocrisy are ways of life in America. But so it's not that. In fact, some of the best, most inspiring stories, and story in the wide sense, it could be film, it could be poetry, it could be art, whatever. They come out of situations of injustice and rupture. So they hold both together, you know. They wrap the heart around all of it.
Yeah.
And so enchantibism is, for me, it's showing how good things could be and letting that motivate us, because I've always been somebody who's more motivated by inspiration than by shaming, blaming, or a lot of negative information.
Yeah.
And I do read the news, including the climate news, and I do stay up on all that, but I don't stay there.
Yeah.
And I think Virgil was right. It's a hell of a lot easier to get to the underworld than it is to get out of it. So
yeah, and that's the thing about the environmental movement. I mean, we're so in it, and yet we're not, because our president has decided it's not happening at all.
Yeah.
But, I think all of us we all feel overwhelmed and shamed and powerless, because in some ways we are about that. But, I feel like there was some opportunity probably 30 years ago for the story of our relationship with the environment and the larger world, some way of telling that would have helped us a little better than the one that we ended up with, which was a sense of feeling like, individually, I've got to throw another can in the recycling bin, otherwise it's kaput for the monarch butterflies next week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually spoke to Ted Rozak about that once on the phone. He wrote something for our Ecotherapy book, and he mentioned some event he was at with a prominent environmentalist where she was doing that, and I said, "Well, how did you respond to that?" And he goes, "I left." I thought that's what a lot of people do. They change the channel, right?
100%, or they just leave their body. I mean,
Yeah.
because I think part of it is that if we on a biological level, we know this is our home, and that we came out of this evolution of these living systems, that we are completely interdependent on all of it. And so even if we never have that thought, somewhere in our psyche we know it. And we know it's intense and we're in trouble. And I do think that, like, it's, there's so much for the modern mind that they have to manage on every, and it gets more complicated every day. I mean, now we're managing social media on top of everything else. I mean, talk about distracting ourselves from just living. It's like, oh, now I'm going to complicate my life with, like, opinions from 2,000 people, and hot takes and all of that. But this sense of, like, this, we already feel disconnected from the world, and then they're asking us that we're responsible for it, when we also feel like we're a child of it. It's like there's a lot of different story inside of us around our relationship with it. And I do think that there, when I was reading the Ecotherapy book a little bit, I started to feel the breadcrumbs of that. I do think people are getting woken up a little bit more around this, because people are getting that nature is more than just a national park, that it really is something essential to our well-being. And I think it's coming alive in this other way, which I think is interesting and is hopeful a little bit. You just see the people who are fighting against this, selling our public lands off to these private companies right now.
Yeah.
And even people who hunt and fish and all of that. Those people have a deep relationship with nature. They really understand interdependence, actually probably more than some latte drinking person from San Francisco.
Yeah.
Which is so beautiful. So, I had mentioned at the beginning, at the introduction, that there's this heroic model of change agents, right? That we've kind of been a part of that story. Our history is told through that lens.
Yeah.
Certainly. So it's kind of the only lens we know, I mean, George Washington, crossing, the Delaware, you think of all these great warriors and kings and all of that. So when you think about some path or model of change that's not dependent on that heroic, thing that we're living into right now, because supposedly our president is the only person who can fix everything, which then makes us feel powerless because we're depending on the warrior to go out and do this. What are some of these non-patriarchal, non-heroic models of change that you ponder?
Yeah, there. If we look at it from the archetypal perspective of somebody like Hillman, there's as many archetypes or gods as there are ways to make change. We're just addicted to one. We're so over-identified with the hero that we can't see outside of it, right? So, Washington's a great example because, he was heroic on the battlefield, no question about that. He was heroic in stepping down from office and not disputing an election. But he also educated people by having one of the best gardens in the colonies. He would take people back there and show them. Madison did too. Franklin, all of those early founder fathers were tremendous gardeners who used that to educate people.
Wow.
So even within the heroic shadow, there's a model. But I think making change through, you mentioned enchanttivism earlier, there's all kinds of people out in the world making change with the arts, with with poetry, with comics. There's I don't know if they're still there. There's actually a Frisbee club in Gaza where they're building community by playing Frisbee together. There's a Gaza surf club. Things like that are happening everywhere. There's something called the Friendship Bench movement in Zimbabwe, where there's a shortage of mental health workers. So grandmothers decided, well, we'll talk to people, right? So you walk up to a bench, there's a grandmother sitting there, and you get to talk to the elders, right? Which is baked into us as a species. We're going back to something we never should have lost. So those are all ways to make change, I think. Telling different kinds of stories. This morning I was thinking about Yo-Yo Ma, who has been to dozens of the poorest parts of cities with his cello. He goes there, he puts on a little concert for people, he plays some Bach, and then he and the people who are with him start asking people questions like, what do you need here? What can we do? How can we bring resources? And he builds it all around the image of home, which speaks to belonging, right? What resources do you need to belong here and to be at home here? He actually asks people that.
Wow.
So there's some really great examples all over the world of change that way.
Yeah. What just struck me when you were saying all of those is I could even feel my mind start to poo-poo them because they're not part of the fucking heroic model. Like it's so unconscious. It's like, yeah, but you need policy and you need a grant for that or whatever it is. Like, yeah, there's a structure to do this stuff, but here's the thing I've been wrestling with lately, and I think a lot of people is, there was such an incredible hope and promise in the 1960s of change. And there was a lot of change that happened. I mean, the civil rights movement and the civil rights legislation was groundbreaking for this country. Truly, truly changed the direction and poverty and all sorts of things that happened during then. And the waking up also of our relationship, and Earth Day was created in the early 70s and all of that. but and I was a kid. I was born in 63. So I was a kid in the 60s and a kid in the early 70s, but I was part of the counterculture. And I do feel like lately with, the ignoring the how long it took for the leaders of the world to really honor the climate crisis. And then the turn here in America to this more authoritarian right-wing voice that's, clearly, the minute Trump got reelected this time, I thought, oh, America's not done with this conversation.
Yep.
Whatever this is, I really, really hold it that way. But, there has been a part of me, and I have moved through it for the most part, of kind of a real despair that, like, well, haven't we tried these other ways of change, Craig? Like, weren't we doing, Wavy Gravy was doing street theater performance politically, and all that kind of stuff. And probably a lot of that did move the needle. I mean, certainly the music of the times did, and certainly the psychotropic drugs did. But it's kind of scary. I guess what I want to say is, and maybe what I'm thinking, what my audience might be thinking a little bit is, it's kind of scary to think if we could lean into these different kinds of ways of change, of making connections, community, belonging, sharing resources, all that kind of stuff, without, as like an underground movement, but not. But it does feel scary to think, like, should I put my time and energy into that? Does it, will it? I mean, we don't know. We don't know if it'll make a difference or not. But have you had to move through that a little bit too and hold the tension of that?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a couple of places I go with that. One of them is that there's, we both know in our own spheres of work, we both know so many organizations and people that are doing good work in the world. I just came back from that visiting professor residency, and I met tons of people up there. I accessed my extroverted side. Come on, do this.
You can do it.
I met people for like 2 weeks straight, almost every day, and then I came home and I hid for 3 days. But but I kept wondering, they, like, some of them, I would meet a farmer over here and a CEO over there, and they all knew each other, all these people I was talking to, and they would co-sponsor events, like one-time onlys. And the whole time I kept thinking, and I asked this a couple of times, why aren't all of us together?
Yeah.
Why aren't all of us working together? All of us put aside some of our differences and, agree to disagree on the rest and make a movement, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we're being called to do, instead of 1,000 or even more little pieces of resistance over here and culture building over there, right? And I think part of it is that we don't have a story that holds us all, or not a story, a set of stories, no big story, but a mythology, a living mythology in the sense that Joseph Campbell meant, right?
Yeah.
And how will we get one of those? That for me is the big question right now.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it really is. I thought about that too when I was prepping for our talk, that certainly Carl Jung was the first person to say, what is our myth of the times? And then Joseph Campbell really kind of put down the gauntlet and is like, we do not have a myth. What is our myth? And, and I wonder if it is this turn towards back to the planet, to the living systems of the planet, to ecosystems themselves, to the metaphor of all of that. Because when we think about these communities, like you said, sometimes people from interesting directions come together for a certain one-off thing because they believe in the same thing. But, you look at the rest of them, like, oh, I don't know, or whatever. But I think about, like, niches, organic living system niches and the rhizomic nature of a forest, let's say. And do you know Bill Plotkin's work?
Yeah.
Yeah. His definition of soul I find so interesting, which is you've found your niche in the ecosystem. Like your work is about the ecosystem that you are in. And I really think this is parallel to what you're talking about here, that there is some way that we all do connect in a way, and that maybe this there is some sort of other way of looking at it to give people, to empower people to do the littlest of things, if they get the urge to do it. I mean, that's the thing too. We all have an urge to help or connect or whatever, but then we look and we feel so overwhelmed. I think also it's so important, I love artists because they create because they have to. Like the thing has to come out of them. And there's something, we all have that urge. We're all artists. We're all creatives. We're all part of the creation story here. And so I always think about, like, there's something about that have to thing that has to come through us. And that the minute it does, most of the time it's really not about I personally. It might come from an I place, but it's always about the we. Especially if it's powerful art or powerful work. And I think that's the same thing with anything, like making a garden, like you said, or a bench where grandmothers can, someone had that idea, right? And it's like, let yourself follow these urges, people. Like, this is life tapping you on the shoulder and saying, go, and you might, and I get this all the time with people who like get these great ideas for what they want to do in the next chapter of their life. And then they're like, oh, but I'm not certified in that, or I don't have, and they get the imposter syndrome. And thinking about it here with you, it's like, oh, the imposter syndrome's coming from that heroic model, that patriarchal model.
Yeah.
Fuck that. If you're not doing brain surgery, you're probably going to be okay. Yeah, maybe have a mentor, maybe have a guide, get some learning, but follow your bliss in this. Yeah.
When people stand in their own way like that, it surely is part of our heroic culture. And in terms of how it shows up inside people, I'm always curious about how it exists as an image or as a character inside them. There's a writer I worked with a while ago who had really bad writer's block, and I asked her, so thinking about this in terms of stories and figures and all that, who is blocking you and why? You need to get to know them better. And it turned out that side of her was trying to protect her from further humiliation. She had been shamed a lot as a kid, and she had to have a conversation with it. And at one point she asked it, what's your name? And it said, Dr. Agon. So when you put those words together, it says dragon, right?
It's so awesome.
And the dragon wanted to show up in the writing project. The dragon was like, well, what about me and my voice, So once it starts out outwardly in this restrictive patriarchal climate that we're in, but once it gets inside us, it starts to turn mythological somehow. And then we can work with it and even enlist it, I think.
Absolutely. And even doing a meditation on connecting to your community and asking, who's needed now, what's needed now, where's the call coming from? What figures, what aspects? And when we talk about figures, I've had Kim Hermanson on, I've had Stephen on. We've been talking a little bit about this deep imagination work that we do with figures. Also know folks out there that, and like we said earlier, Hillman was talking about, buildings can be a figure, a city, like your dream can be that. A neighborhood, certainly. Santa Monica Bay, for me, I have a great relationship with her and the Santa Monica Mountains. They're big figures inside of me and are a big part of who I am. And that's why the fires were so terrifying. And so, I was just laid out for 3 days because it was just
Mm,
beyond the loss from people in their homes, which is just such a
mm,
nightmare, but just this whole area being
yeah.
ravaged. And then, of course, going and seeing the green coming out and being like, okay, there will be
Mm.
rebirth. Nature is already doing
Mm,
her thing.
mm,
Um, so, yeah, so that's one way that I think people can become part of this troop of change, which you call these people lamplighters. I love that
yeah.
phrase. So how are you? I know you're creating a little community and
Mm.
some work in this direction. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to with that.
So I recently got a grant for this, which I wasn't even looking for. And it has to do with what we were talking earlier about who will build, the big stories for our time from the
Mm,
ground up. I think a lot of us, especially progressive folks, we're afraid of what we call grand narratives in the academic world. We're afraid of these oppressive, I mean, we're seeing this right now, right? My
yes,
agenda imposed on you, right?
right.
Dad will fix it. He'll break it and then he'll fix it, right? And so, because that's the strategy. So we're understandably afraid of that kind of thinking. But there's a form of unity that rises among people spontaneously in a more visionary sense. So my thought was, why don't we get all those people together somewhere?
Yeah.
And so as part of that, so that's Lampcove. I'm building it in Mighty Networks. There's like 80 people in there right now. There's a free tier. As part of that, I'm thinking about something that's more like an academy outside of higher education, where we could teach people how to do this. We could teach people how to bring inspiration and art and other things into the world in a conscious way and network with each other instead of it just being a bunch of individual projects that have their day and then fade away, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Eh, yeah, I love that. So a real community building effort,
mhm.
and expanding from there then through some sort of very rhizomic nature of growth,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, I really do see it that way. Uh, it's so beautiful. There's a woman, I can't remember her name right now, who is doing something like that in Ireland.
Mm,
And a actual Pacifica person turned me on to her, and I will put that in my show notes once I can find it, and
mm.
I'll share it with you, Craig. Uh, I just applied today to be part of Lampcove, so my application is in right
Ah.
now, hoping to join the community,
Mm,
because and that's really what I'm doing here too with this podcast is
yep.
reaching out to people who might follow me for different reasons or know me from my old podcast or know me from all
Mm,
my other work. But really trying to specifically bring in conversations here for
mm,
this liminal space we're in as a species, as a planet, as sentience, as consciousness, as psyche,
mm.
all of this, and trying to bring in edge dwellers,
Yeah.
those of us who kind of know how to, who are psychopomps, are
Mm,
shapeshifters. We know how to move
mm,
in worlds, whether it's academia and art or psychotherapy and
mm.
gardening, like whatever it is, there's this, and so much now, everyone is a hyphenate. So it's already happening. We're all hyphenates. We're
Yep.
all seeing that we're not just one thing anymore. We can't be because we have so much to
Mm,
play with and so many things that pull us, and it's all connected in the end. It really, really
mm,
is. So yeah, these are interesting times, and and we're all looking for the myth of our time, the story of our
mm.
time, and I'm so glad that you write speculative fiction that allows us to
Mm.
see what's possible and what could be, in a way that's generative and
Mm.
not just dystopian, because we certainly have enough of the world has ended and now we need to survive stories. They're on every streaming platform you can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, yeah. Yeah, so this has been great. Thank you so much, Craig, for bringing your heart and your mind and
Mm,
your curiosity and fascination and the package that it comes in with this work. I hope people who are interested in this go check you out. Your website and stuff like that will be in the show notes for everyone, for all of you out there. You can connect with Craig more. And Craig also just did a series at the New School, which is in Bolinas. And the New School is one of those places that he was talking about that brings interesting people together because it's hoity-toity, north of San Francisco, and yet this is an organization that's been having fascinating conversations around healing and nature and psychology for decades. I've been a fan of their podcast forever. Their stuff is so great. So check all of that out. Thank you again, Craig, for being here. Any last words you have for us today?
Keep imagining. Yeah, keep imagining. And if those voices show up who discourage you, welcome them into the imagining. Put a mask on them and go, okay, it's your turn. What part do you want to play now?
Yeah, tell me your life story, please.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, a little bit of attention does amazing things for these inner figures. I have to tell you. I just did a whole piece on my inner. I have a new figure that I discovered, Roger, the rational rock star. He and I've been hanging out the last 2 months, and it's been really good. So thank you. Yeah, it's really been cool. Thank you, Craig, so much again, and look forward to jumping in the sandbox with you in the future and doing something big in the world, or small.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Kelly.
You're welcome.